As a result of discussion with many people in the sector, it was decided that we should have a strong leadership component in the summit, and to that end we identified Noetic Consulting to provide that leadership. So if I could ask Peter Murphy to please come to the podium to have a discussion on leadership. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here. So as Chris has said, I'll be talking for about 20 minutes. And then I'll bring up the panel, and we've got a lot of really good things to hear from them. But if you take only one thing away from today, one thing, it's this, that leadership is a verb, it's not a noun. And if we all reflect back on when we were at primary school, and I think most of us learnt grammar when we were at primary school, we're at that age, it's a doing word. Leadership is a doing word. But it's interesting, of course, that my view is that you can't actually be taught leadership, but you can learn about it. Now that might sound odd, because if you have a look at my bio in the program, I was Chief of Staff of the Royal Military College of Australia for 3 years. The Royal Military College of Australia is in fact the oldest leadership institution in Australia, and perhaps one of the most eminent. But to actually show that you can learn leadership without learning leadership. General Monash, perhaps our most famous general and certainly one of the greatest leaders that this country has ever produced, never attended a single leadership course. He learned about it on the job and did an incredible job with that. But if you look at the aged care and residential sector, what can the military and a former army officer tell you about leadership? Well, let me give you a vignette. In 1996, I had the great pleasure and honour to be seconded to the Indian Army for 12 months. After that 12 months, I returned back to Australia, and I left an army, the Indian Army, that was at the centre of national consciousness. When I got back here, I arrived in Army headquarters, and I found an army that was atrophying. It was a bit of a shock. I'd come out of regimental life, I went to India, and then suddenly I saw at the strategic level that Army was losing the battle. What had happened was that senior defence policy makers and government were focused on what was then called the air-sea gap. Army was irrelevant, or becoming irrelevant. What did it mean? It meant that there was a lack of resources, that we couldn't recruit good people, that we were actually almost facing oblivion. It's hard to believe, but that was the challenge that was before us. There was a lot of uncertainty and there was a lot of angst. Move forward 10 years. What happened? Army is in Afghanistan and Iraq and doing incredible things, incredibly successful things. So what was the difference between the mid-90s and the 2000s? It was leadership. It was leadership by our senior generals at the time. What did they do? Well, the first thing was that they saw that there was an issue of relevance. They named the problem and they started to do something about it. The second thing that they did was actually attempt to shape the wider debate. They knew that they had to be seen to be relevant, not only internally, but across the whole community and particularly with decision makers. Myself and two of my colleagues here, Andrew Balmax and Matt Graham, were conscripted into an organisation called Futureland Warfare. And of my 21 years in the Army, I think that was the most interesting, because we had a remit to get out and actually sell who we were and what we were doing as an army. But perhaps most important was that the leadership capability that had always been built in Army in 1999 in Timor was demonstrated to be a success. And no more so than the then Major General Peter Cosgrove, who led that organisation to success with many, many difficulties. And you might care to ask some of the panel who had a much greater insight to what those difficulties were at the time. But we were successful. And the key driver there was strong, determined leadership, both when things were going bad and then when things were we were under threat. So I think that there is a useful lesson there for this industry, because as we've heard all this morning, there are a whole range of threats and issues that are facing you. And what we're going to put forward today is that your leadership, your individual and your collective leadership, will make the difference. Yesterday, I had a fabulous morning with your emerging leaders group. It was a real pleasure to work with about 30 of them and to hear what they're doing and about their views on the industry. And what the 4 things that I spoke and worked with them on were these up here. The first one is acting. Leaders act. You have to do things. So we talked about that, which was really interesting. The second is learning. And as I mentioned before, I think you can learn to be a leader, and learning as a leader is a lifelong activity. The third one was about being, about what sort of person are you as a leader. And the fourth one was investing, and that's investing in the next cohort of leaders. There's 2 of those themes that I'll explore with you today because I think that they're quite relevant to you and your positions. But there are 2 others that I want to talk about, and that's that senior leaders have an outwards and inwards focus. You have both. And the fourth one, and the other one is that leaders tackle wicked problems. That is, those that are enduring and don't have a definitive solution. And you know that you're going to have to keep on working on them. Leadership lessons are everywhere. It's one of the great privileges of what we do is that we get to see leadership examples all over the place. And one of the things we see is leadership failure often has, or usually has, significant consequences. You could probably name as many military campaigns or battles that have been disasters, but the disaster that I think has most resonance is that of Piper Alpha. In 1988, an oil rig with some 200 odd men on it, and they were all men back then, exploded or caught fire and then exploded. 167 men died within the space of about 6 hours, all totally unnecessary. There was a lot of failures when that happened, but the root cause of the failure was a failure of leadership, an absolute failure of leadership. What I'd like to do is just play a video now from the BBC show Spiral to Disaster, which I actually think is one of the best leadership videos I've ever seen. I wish I'd have had it when I was at Duntroon. I would have used it all the time because it shows leadership failure in all its guises.
Lord Cullen eventually described Occidental's approach to safety as superficial. It cited a catalogue of errors and shortcomings, many of which other North Sea operators.
I wouldn't put it above or below other disasters. There is actually an awful sameness about these incidents. They're nearly always characterised by lack of forethought and lack of analysis, and nearly always the problem comes down to poor management. It's not just due to one particular person not following a procedure or doing something wrong. You always come back to the fact that things are sloppy and ill-organised and unsystematic right from the top of the company downwards.
This disaster highlights that leadership failure was systemic across that organisation and that it started at the top. So it's interesting, safety is a wicked problem, it's always there, and I think particularly those in aged care would appreciate that is the case. But the managers of Occidental, the owners of the platform, were complacent, and a lot of people died of it because of it. Just reflect back this morning with Dr. Peter Wilton. Complacency leads to disaster. I think I really enjoyed both Peter's presentations yesterday with the emerging leaders and this morning, because I think he hits on a number of important things that I'll explore a little bit during our discussion. In the case of Piper Alpha, it was the collective impact of the failure to respond to the risks that led to disaster. Leadership action at any one point in what led up to that fire and explosion could have stopped what occurred. So it was a failure of leadership at the top and at the bottom. Leaders were not empowered at any point, and that's what you ended up with. So what do you learn from that? The first thing is that you need to act, and you need to empower others to act. And we'll come back to empowering others to act a bit later. Yesterday with the Emerging Leaders Group, Peter Wilton made a telling observation, and for me it was a new one. He made the point that in most countries, the aged care industry is actually leading the regulators. And when I reflected upon it, I thought, well, it's true in most industries. So you look at unmanned aerial vehicles, so military technology that's interestingly gone into the civil sector. You've got businesses that have come up with innovative new ideas that are driving that forward. In the US, I know the regulator there, the Aviation Authority, has put a 12-month moratorium on things while it tries to sort out its regulation. But from what I understand in this industry, the regulator or government is actually driving us. So consumer-directed care is actually being imposed upon us, not us driving it. In military terms, we describe you as having lost the battlefield initiative. In the military, it's not enough just to look after your unit and your soldiers. It's expected as a leader that you look after your people. You need to win on the battlefield. Good leaders shape the battlefield and find new opportunities. They understand that not every opportunity will lead to success. What they do is they employ a thing called reconnaissance pull. Reconnaissance pull helps you to find where the gaps are. It helps you to follow up on success, but you learn from failure. Successful leaders use this to allow independent action from their people while being able for them to be able to shape the battlefield and gain and seize that initiative. It also allows them to work collaboratively with other units on their flanks. And this is something that it seems to be missing here, collaborative and cohesive action to address some of your higher order issues. So as Peter Wilton challenged you this morning, how are you going to shape the future? How are you going to actually seize that initiative as an industry and as individual organisations, so to make sure that you stay relevant and that you will continue to be successful in the future? Because Peter was very clear, I think, in showing what's worked in the past isn't necessarily going to work in the future. One of the other things that reconnaissance pull is useful for is that it frees your people. One of the things that came up yesterday was micromanagement. And I need to be honest with you, some of you out there are micromanagers. You need to let your people get on with the job, because you need to be shaping the future. You can't be shaping the future when you're managing your people in absolute detail. One of the enablers of reconnaissance pull is a technique known as mission command. It allows junior leaders to get on with the job. So here's a tool that you can use to help your people get on with the job. It allows them to develop innovative solutions and to find new ways of solving the problems. So what is mission command? Mission command is just a simple framework that allows you to express your intent. What is it that you want your people to do? What is it that you want that one team or that one group to do? It's your intent. Where do you want to be? It's that, I guess if you look at what Peter was talking about, it's that to be. We're here, this is where we need to get to. You specify as objectives because you'll have a range of teams. What do you want this team to get on with? But there will be constraints. There's not unlimited resources. You need to actually be quite specific about what they can and they can't do. You need to set boundaries as part of that, and then you need to set timeframes. Then you need to let them get on with it. That's not to say that you take your hands off and absolve yourself of a responsibility. You still need to monitor. You still need to help them, but you do need to let them get on with it. A key enabler of Mission Command is well-trained and well-prepared junior leaders. Without this, Mission Command would fail, with junior leaders not knowing how to discharge their responsibilities, and you as senior managers having no faith in what they're going to do. This requires them to have both technical skills and leadership skills. They need both. From what I saw yesterday, certainly all of your emerging leaders have very good technical skills and a variety of leadership skills. And we'll come back to some of that a bit later. In the military, choosing and developing leaders starts at the time of recruitment, with future leaders being chosen for having good leadership potential. We all have some leadership potential, but you want to choose people that have got the highest potential and develop them. In the military, that leadership potential is developed across their whole career. At every stage, people are being developed specifically for their leadership skills. They're also being assessed on it. And the leadership skills are complemented by good decision making, good risk management skills, and the ability to achieve results. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want. The military success on the battlefield demonstrates that this lifelong system of learning and development produces results. The question for you to ask, though, of yourself is, do we have a robust, effective system in place to develop our future leaders? From the discussions that we had yesterday, some organisations, it appears, have very good systems in place, and you should be congratulated from that. Other organisations are only just starting that journey. If you're only starting the journey, you need to move quickly, because it takes time to develop good, effective leaders. Believe me, we took 18 months when I was at the Royal Military College to start that process. It takes time. I've also been working with another organisation with their leadership cohort. We've been working together for 2 years now, and the head of that organisation said she's only really seeing really good results now. I said earlier that you can't be taught leadership, but you can learn from it.